Welcome to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. My guest on today's podcast is my friend, Darren Bush. Welcome to the podcast, Darren.
Thank you, Richard.
Tell our listeners where you are calling in from.
I'm calling in from Madison, Wisconsin, which I call Zion.
Why do you call it Zion?
Because it's where the pure in heart dwell.
That's awesome.
Midwesterners are a unique group of people, and anybody who's lived here knows that there's such thing as Midwest nice, and I think there's people get along really well here. It's kind of a nice place to live. I've lived here for 35 years, and pretty much all of my adult life. And my wife is a Madison native. That's how I ended up here. I came here for my wedding reception. I'd never been to Wisconsin before.
Wow.
And my wife and I went to BYU for 1 year. She went for 2 years. I came home from my mission and had been accepted to BYU. And because of some family situations, my dad had lost his business, and the home life wasn't really good to hang out. So I basically hitched a ride to BYU and had a small loan from my bishop, and started my life there, and met my wife a couple weeks later, and we dated for a year, and came here for my wedding reception. And I said to my father-in-law, "Why doesn't everybody live here?" And he said, "I have no idea." And
what time of year was your wedding reception?
It was late April, which is beautiful. I mean, could be snowing, it could be 60. That's April in Wisconsin, but it was beautiful and green, and there was water everywhere, and that appealed to me, giving my hobby, which we'll get into later. But I transferred all my BYU credits, except for the Book of Mormon class, which they wouldn't take for some reason. I don't know why, right? But graduated from here. I'm a Badger, and it's a fun thing. There's a lot of connections with the University of Wisconsin, with your podcast and your friends. Spencer Fluman got his PhD here, and I know he's been on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I knew him when he was a grad student.
That's small world.
And Miriam Bergen is the wife of my Bishop Alan Bergen. The year I was at BYU with Stephanie, and he got his PhD here. In the 60s, I think. So if you go to BYU graduation, you'll see a lot of red and white stoles on the faculty.
That's awesome. Well,
so
thanks.
I know a lot of people. Yeah, I know a lot of people at BYU on the faculty there just because they came through here.
It's really interesting. It's a small world when it comes to the LDS Church. And just on behalf of our listeners, just as an overview and introduction, Darren serves as a bishop in his congregation. He's been a bishop for about 2 years. He's also someone who's what I would call very supportive of LGBTQ people and trying to, within the doctrine of our church, to create more space and understanding and bring voice. And so neither Darren and I are officially speaking for the church. Darren holds obviously a bishop calling. We're not here like in an official capacity to say this is how it works. We're just here as committed members of our church, serving the best we can and sharing insights. I think I've asked Darren to share some of the things about what he's doing in his ward to help everybody feel welcome and safe, and some of his insights that I think will be helpful for other local leaders that may be listening that are trying to create a feeling of Zion within their ward or stake. And also for those of us that are trying to better meet the needs of LGBTQ members, what can we do? What can we say to help better lift their load and see their contributions? And we started with prayer. Darren and I said a prayer before we started, and we just pray that there'll be nuggets of inspiration that Darren will share that will be helpful for you and give you a little more hope or a little more understanding. Is that a fair introduction, Darren?
That's beautiful.
Let's talk with you being called to be bishop. Tell us how that went down.
So this is funny. I was always very content to serve in the background. And didn't consider myself a leader in an official capacity, and was enjoying my life in nursery as a nursery leader for several years. And there's no better place to be in the church. My last official act as bishop will be to call myself to the nursery. I love it. And I was in the nursery with like 4 kids on my lap reading books to them, and the stake president stuck his head in the door about 10 years ago and said, "Well, Darren Bush, isn't it great to see you doing what the Savior would do?" And I thought he was being sarcastic, but he wasn't. I said, "Well, this is where it starts, right here." And he said, "You're right." And 2 weeks later, he called me and says, "We want you to be on the High Council." And I'm like, why? He said, "Because you get it." And I said, "Okay." So I was on the High Council. So I went from nursery to High Council, which was interesting. And I traveled around a lot. And, that did that for a while. And then I was called from there to be in the YSA bishopric, which was also something that I was surprised by. And that was a really interesting calling, because the person who was called to be bishop didn't know me. And they basically gave him a list of people, Melchizedek priesthood holders that were over 50. And I didn't know about that, but that is something they usually look for YSA wards. I don't know why that is, but that's what they did. And I wasn't on that list. And Bishop Hansen kept on looking at the list and saying, "There's nobody here I want." And finally he said, "What about Darren Bush?" And they went, "How do you know Darren?" He's like, "I don't, but someone said he's a decent guy." And they said, "Well, he's 49. That's why he's not on the list." So they called me to the bishopric. I met the bishop in the parking lot before we were sustained for the first time, and served in the YSA bishopric, and it was lovely. I absolutely loved it.
How long did you serve in that bishopric?
3 years. Yeah, it was 3 years.
And where is that ward located? Is it in Madison or somewhere else?
It's in Madison. It was downtown. It was actually they met in the Institute building. That was the first chapel built in Madison in the late 50s. That was dedicated by David O. McKay. Just a little tiny church, and we met there, and it was wonderful, and I loved it, and loved my kids. And funny, they called me Papa Bush too.
That's great.
Which is kind of cool. Papa B sometimes. I heard they call you Papa Osler. It just warmed my heart.
Everybody over 50, I guess, becomes a Papa.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. And especially if they don't have the best role models for papas. And that's something that I discovered, and I'm sure you did too, in a YSA ward, is a lot of these kids come from homes where they didn't have the best example. And in my patriarchal blessing, it says that my wife and I have a role that will be important as a couple. We always thought that would be, serving a mission, and maybe it will be, but we learned, very early on, we had a lot of the youth from the YSA in our house a lot, because the other counselor and the bishop lived outside of our ward boundaries up quite a ways away. And since we were the closest in to town, they gathered here a lot. And more than once I came home and someone had a key to the house and they were in the basement watching movies. I'm like, "Oh, hey, look who's here." So anyway, after 3 years, they don't like people serving more than 3 years out of their ward. At least that's how it is in around here. So I got put back into the ward, and made me executive secretary as soon as I got back into the ward. And I don't know why, because I'm not very organized. I'm not. In fact, I'm not organized at all. That's what I have smart people for. And but then they called me to be in the bishopric shortly after that. And then the bishop that I served under was a wonderful, wonderful man. He was released, and we knew he was coming up on being released. And I was the second counselor at the time, and I thought, well, I'm safe. And the stake president calls me, and or the stake executive secretary calls me, and I know Kevin. He was one of the wards I was in when I was on the High Council, and said, "Hey, the stake president wants to see you." And I went, "Oh, okay. What do I do?" He's like, nothing. It's all good. I'm like, I don't want to, I like what I'm doing. He's like, no, it's all good. Don't worry about it. And he called my wife and said, we need to see you too. Can you come out? And she said, okay. And she called me and I said, yeah, they called me too. I'll have to go right from work. And she hung up the phone and just started bawling. And I said, and she told me this later, she's like, I knew exactly what they were going to do. I had no clue. And so I work in the outdoor industry. I own a specialty retail shop. We sell canoes and kayaks, stand-up boards, and camping gear and stuff like that here in Madison. And so that's my love. I love paddling. I'm a paddler. And so I was wearing basically cargo shorts and Chaco sandals and workwear. And I told Ken, I'm coming straight from work, and he's like, the stake president loves you. He doesn't care. So I didn't stop at home. I went straight there because we closed about 6, and I took off, and I walk in, and our stake president is just the loveliest man. And he just sees me and smiles and says hi, and he puts his arm around me. And I said, sorry, I couldn't have time to put on my tie. And he's like, oh, we don't care. And we sit down. He said, so Stephanie, tell me about your husband. I went, no. And he said, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her. And she said, he's the most wonderful man I know. And, and does he have a testimony? She's like, yes, he does. And, and I'm just sitting there going, no. And he finally looks at me and says, so Darren, we'd like to call you to be the bishop of the Madison First Ward. And I said, all right, you know me, right? And he said, yeah. I said, I'm not a pious person. I'm pretty rough around the edges, actually. He said, yeah, I know. He said, I don't like how the church treats women and gay people. I think that there's some problems there that need to be solved. I swear sometimes, and I don't suffer fools lightly. So I don't think I'm qualified for this. And he said, that's why we want you, because you don't want the job. And I said, well, but what about, I'm not going to change who I am. He's like, we don't want you to. You love everybody. That's what we want. That's what your ward needs right now. And I said, so you've thought about this. He says, Darren, we've been praying about it for 3 months. And you keep coming up. I said, okay, so all I have to do is love everybody? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, I can do that. And left, and my wife just started crying, and I just started crying. I'm like, oh, I don't need this right now. And she said, but the ward needs you. That's what's needed right now. We have about 450 members, a record in our ward right now. So it's a huge ward. And it's an interesting composition of older people, graduate students, young working families, all across the board. In our primary, we have 3 nurseries. It's that kind of ward. So it's big and diverse. We don't have enough Spanish speakers in Madison for a Spanish branch. So the Spanish speaking members meet with our ward, and sacrament meetings are translated into Spanish.
Cool.
And then they have their own Sunday school and priesthood. And so I have 3 counselors. I have 2 English speaking and 1 Hispanic counselor who's from South America. And we have 2 elders quorums, English and Spanish speaking. And we have a couple of French speakers that have the meetings translated as well. So when I say it's a diverse ward, I mean it's a diverse ward. So I did not serve a Spanish-speaking mission. I served an Italian-speaking mission. So I speak Spanish with a very Italian accent, and they think it's hilarious. And they're very sweet about it. I mean, I can do temple recommend interviews in Spanish. I can do the basic things you need to do, but there's plenty of people in the ward who speak Spanish. And if there's a temple recommend interview that might go a little bit sideways, I turn it over to my 3rd counselor. And if something goes off the rails, he brings them back to me, and then we translate.
That's cool.
So that's how the word is run. Lots and lots of very good people that are very competent. and I try and stay out of their way.
This is a pretty tender story with you being called as bishop by a stake presidency that spent multiple months in thought and prayer. I like that you were honest with some of your church concerns. I think a lot of really faithful, committed members are unsettled about some parts of our church, and I think that's fine. I think you mentioned our gay members and women, and then I think you said, I swear.
I do.
And then I
have a picture of J. Golden Kimball on the bulletin board in my office at church.
and I like the way, I think my guess is if your stake president were on the podcast, he'd say, I know Darren really well. And I've known him as a friend, and I've seen him in the stake, and I've seen him serve. And between my personal interaction with Darren and your wife, and I think her name is Stephanie, and the Lord's impressions on me, I love then what he said to you that I need you to do and what you knew you could do. I need you to love everybody. How cool is that?
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. We start 5 minutes late all the time, and it's because I haven't hugged all the widows yet. I really don't care about starting on time if I haven't hugged all the widows. I do that every week, and it's critical because they get hugged once a week, right? These poor women, they get no physical contact. No one ever just comes up and hugs them and says, I love you. And that's why we take care of widows, right? I don't try and start late, but there are times when my first counselor, who is a gem and an engineer, so it's like, Darren, now. Okay, so they'll drag me up to the stand. So the whole thing about being on the stand 10 minutes before to be a good example. Sorry, I don't do that. I'm trying to set a good example by hugging widows. It's more important than sitting up there looking good. I don't often wear a white shirt.
Tell us more about your ward and what you're doing to love everybody and helping everybody feel welcome and bring them to Christ. You don't wear a white shirt. I interrupted you. Tell our listeners about that. No,
I don't often. I don't do it to make a statement. I do it because I don't want to wear a white shirt sometimes. And, I've had a couple people say, gee, you're not wearing a white shirt. I said, well, let's talk about that. And this gets to our discussion we can have about doctrine, dogma, practice, and folk and tradition. So, two of the members of my bishopric have beards. And I know that in some places that would be, the stake president would say, sorry, you got to shave it. And they won't, because he would never ask them to, because that's who they are. And one of the things that I think helps everybody feel welcome in our ward is you are allowed to be you. If you want to shave your head on one side, fine. You want to dye your hair purple, fine. You want to come in cowboy boots, jeans, and a shirt, fine. I don't care. And I don't want anybody else to care. So I think I lead by showing people it's okay to be different, and that's okay. And it reminds me, I had an incident last year where a man came into the church looking for some help. He wasn't a member, but his son was. And he said, I just got to town. I'm staying at the homeless shelter. He said, I've got a job. I start on Monday. I just need some money to do the laundry. And I said, well, here's $20, right? And he's like, that's thank you. And we just talked for a while, and that doesn't come out of fast offerings. It's, Darren's $20 rule. I'll give anybody $20 if they need it, right? And he came back the next week, and he was Catholic. He walks in the back row, or backs in the entrance, and crosses himself and sits down in the back row. And then his son comes in and sits next to him. I'm like, we win. He came back. And, I'm sitting up on the stand seeing this, and I said, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. That he came back and went back, and before he left, went back and grabbed him and, gave him a hug and said, "Welcome, glad you're here. How's work?" He said, "It's working out pretty good." So that's what I do. Simple as that.
Simple as that. I love your focus on the widows. I love that you'd like to start on time, but you just recognize you can do more maybe in that 5 minutes at times for somebody else. And so we got, talk about these words, doctrine, dogma, and practice. And then maybe culture too.
This is something that I think would help, I think, everybody in the church just kind of settle down a little bit. And there are doctrines. The doctrines of the church are beautiful, and immutable and unchangeable. The atonement of Jesus Christ is doctrine. It is beautiful, right? The principles of the gospel, faith, repentance, baptism, gift of the Holy Ghost, not changing. Okay, preach the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, also not changing. So there are these things that don't change. Interestingly, they're kind of wrapped up in mechanisms to allow us to do that efficiently. And so that's doctrine. And the church is not the doctrine. The church is the mechanism we use to implement the doctrine in our lives. So we are given programs. We are given structure and meetings to allow us to bring us to Christ. In and of themselves, they're not really that important. So, changing from 3 hours to 2 hours, that was great. It has some unintended consequences for me. What I learned is I'm at church just as much as I was before. But I used to grab people out of Sunday school and have conversations with them when I felt like it was needed, and could do that without disturbing their family. And now I have to, make other arrangements for that. But that was a policy. That has nothing to do with doctrine. They can make church 15 minutes with a prayer of the sacrament and send everybody home. And that would be fulfilling what needs to get done for the doctrine to be practiced. They could make church 5 hours long, and it wouldn't matter. So it's just a mechanism. And people our age, specifically our age, Richard, know about missions that were 18 months. Not many people know about this, right? Unless you're 55 to 58 years old, something in there you don't know. But for a short period of time, the church changed missions, duration of missions for elders from 2 years to 18 months for about 2 years. And then they changed it back to 24 months. And the reason they cut it short was because missions were getting expensive, and they thought it was a burden on the families. And then they found out that missionaries, especially foreign language-speaking missionaries, were affected their last 6 months more than the rest of their mission. So they moved it back again. And I'd been on my mission 11 months when they made that change. And the change was, if you've been out less than a year, you go home at 18. If you've been out more than a year, you can choose anything between 18 and 24. So I wasn't given a choice. And when I said, well, I don't like that, my mission president said, are you saying the brethren are wrong? I said, well, what do you say to that when you're a 20-year-old missionary, right? Said, well, of course not. In my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know if the brethren have anything to do with this. I think this is a policy change based on someone, lower than that. And then they said, hey, we've looked at the numbers. They take it to the presidency or to whoever they take it to, missionary committee, and they say, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Well, just like any other system, they didn't have all the information they needed, so they changed it back. That doesn't mean the church isn't true. It means they're poking at it and trying to figure it out, just like everybody else. So another example of that
I assume that didn't change for you to be served 2 years. It was that way.
Yeah, it changed. Go ahead. Sorry.
Did you serve 2 years or 18 months?
18 months. I didn't have a choice.
You didn't have a choice, and it didn't reverse back until you were long home.
Yeah, I was married. And the interesting thing was, and of course missionaries are missionaries, and they do things sometimes. When they changed it to go to 18 months. So people who had been out more than a year actually had a tough time because they could choose between 18 and 24, and there was a lot of, well,
cultural pressure.
You choose 18, you're not valiant, and you should serve your whole 24, and just judgment and stuff like that. Which,
and you're in Italy. You're in Italy learning a language, aren't you?
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So,
just as an aside, I was in England about 23 months out when that change happened, and
yeah.
I kind of just was grateful. I love the way you framed that up. Is as they got better, I've always thought better information results in better revelation, and I like your phrase "poking at it." The intent was try to improve things, the missionary program, make us more effective, balance financial needs and the mission of the church. And yeah, I think if people are unsettled like you were as a missionary, we need to create space for people to be unsettled as they continue to stay on the covenant path and are committed to the church.
Right.
And so I think that's a good principle you teach firsthand with your own experience.
People are allowed to make mistakes. I mean, the atonement is plan A, right? I tell my sheep this all the time. I said, look, the atonement's plan A, there's no plan B. You're going to make mistakes. That's part of the reason we're here. And you're going to mess up, and that's okay. You're expected to. I'm not saying try to, but you're going to. It's part of the human condition. That's why there's an atonement. Otherwise, we wouldn't need it. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Don't be afraid of trying things. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And that's okay. And part of that I learned in my business is part of my spiritual practice. It really is. Because I'm not afraid to make mistakes at my business, because the worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work. And we do something else. And we did that in the Word as well. We tried different things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We tried to do too many linger-longers. Well, too many doesn't work. So we cut it back. And, we tried to do some stuff with the Hispanic members, and some of those things worked, some of those things didn't. And so you can't be afraid to try things. And that's true of an organization. It's also true of an individual. And we have a little mantra in our family of what's the worst thing that can happen. And it sounds fatalistic, but it actually isn't. When I bought my business, we were all in. I mean, I cashed out my IRA and hawked my house, and, we were all in. And, I said to my wife, if this doesn't go well, we're going to be bankrupt. She said, what's the worst thing that can happen? We go bankrupt. And you get a job, and I get a job, and we get a 2-bedroom apartment, and we start over again. We have each other, we have the gospel. That's really all anybody needs. And because we weren't attached to the idea of this goes badly, what's going to happen, it doesn't matter. In the eternal scheme of things, what happens doesn't really matter that much. So focusing on, what is good and what is necessary, our relationship with each other and our family is all that was really important. So we took a big risk, and it paid off okay. We're doing okay.
Any more you want to share about doctrine, dogma, or practice before we move on to another topic?
Yeah, so it's I think that the key to being happy in the church, one of the keys to being happy in the church, is to differentiate between those things, and then let things go. Okay. Here's a great example of doctrine. Doctrine is we take the sacrament as emblems of the body and blood of Christ. Dogma is we take it with our right hand. There's nothing anywhere that says you need to take the sacrament with the right hand. But some people, it just feels wrong because they've been doing that way for so long. Well, I have a problem with my right hand. I had an accident with the table saw years ago, and it's kind of hard for me to grab things with my index finger if they're little. Normally, it doesn't bother me at all, but trying to grab a sacrament cup with my right hand is tricky. So I have to kind of monkey with it a little bit. And without drawing attention to myself, I try and do it. And sometimes I have to switch hands. That doesn't make the sacrament invalid, right? And, I heard someone say, well, my dad once said that my grandpa said that a man who gives a blessing without a white shirt and a tie on isn't exercising his priesthood. Well, that's nice. That would be an example of dogma in the worst way. That's not even dogma, that's tradition. And, well, tradition has its place, not if it displaces doctrine. And we can't focus on things that don't matter. We're going to lose the big picture, which is the atonement of our Savior and the saving ordinances. Everything else is secondary to that. Women in our ward wear jumpsuits and pants. It's no big deal. And, my daughter is a school teacher. She wears a jumpsuit to church because guess what? Sometimes she's chasing kids around. If you're in the nursery, you're wearing a dress, that's a pain in the butt. So, and people who move here sometimes like, she's wearing pants. It's like, why are we even talking about this? Does this really matter at all we focus on these weird things. And I love your podcast on, is she wearing her temple garment? It's that kind of thing that's like, why do you care? It's none of your business, And, a person once, their mom said to them, I'm worried about your eternal salvation. And her response was beautiful. It's, Mom, how about you worry about yours and I'll worry about mine? And we don't make covenants to make sure everybody else keeps their covenants, right?
Right.
We make covenants for us, not for everybody else. So being that kind of judgmental doesn't do anybody any good.
Why do you think we sometimes get in this...
Just rambling here.
I love your example of taking the sacrament with the right hand, and that is not anywhere in any... It's a preference or it's dogma. It's just, but it's not part of our doctrine, and rightly so, as you share. That if we get so focused on that, we forget the big picture. Other examples of that come to mind that you're trying to, make sure we don't get in your ward kind of use those keeping us sidetracked from bigger issues or bigger purpose.
Well, women wearing pants is another one, which I think is just, we shouldn't waste any more breath on that one. What people wear to church, what we tell investigators, and a lot of our investigators, like in many situations, they're looking for something. Sometimes they're not the most well off. And, with the Hispanic community, they don't have suits. They don't have shirts and ties. And when they look around, and it's like, I don't have that. It's like, you know what? Wear the best you have, the cleanest you have. That's all we care about. You're just showing respect to the Lord, and that's really what the dress code is how respectful can you be? And you can show up at a certain time and be completely disrespectful. You can show up in jeans and a t-shirt and be respectful. And I have a friend who is a bishop, there was a guy in his congregation who was not less active, completely inactive, and we went to visit him. He's like, I don't feel comfortable coming to church for a lot of reasons. He said, I smoke, I drink, and I don't have a shirt and tie. And he said, if you come to church next week, you wear jeans and a t-shirt, and I'll wear jeans and a t-shirt. Deal? He's like, yeah, right. He said, no, deal? I said, right. So he wore jeans and a t-shirt the next week and sat on the stand, and this brother wore jeans and a t-shirt, and he was there. And that is all that matters, is that they are in there, sitting there, participating, feeling loved.
That's
what they
cool.
wear, I don't care.
It's really cool.
That's Christ-like, right?
It is.
That's what Christ would do.
That is what Christ would do. Talk about your youth. I don't know how many are in your youth, and I haven't been a bishop of youth. I've been a bishop of a YSA group, but just talk to our listeners about youth age 12 to 19 and what issues they faced and their good hearts and what you do to help move them forward in their lives.
What issues they face are not being trusted by their parents. In general, that's not true for all of them. But I think sometimes we think that all youth, if you give them a little bit of leash, they're going to go crazy. And we don't give them enough the respect that's due to them. If you treat them with respect as adults and give them expectations, my experience is they fulfill that. If you treat them like infants, they'll behave like infants. A 14-year-old kid definitely needs guidance, but not that much. A light hand on the tiller is a good thing with youth. The most important thing is they know that they're loved, period. Unconditionally and without reservation. And if they know that, they will come to you and they will talk to you and they will tell you anything. And I don't have a desk in my office. Well, no, I have a desk in my office. It's at church. It's pushed off into the corner. When I talk to someone, we're sitting face to face. I often put them in the comfortable chair, and it puts them a little bit higher than me, which is not a bad thing. And they feel like, hey, I get the comfy chair. And you should see them change when you do that, when you change the power gradient and, put them in a position of comfort. And it's like, okay, I'm just here as your friend. Yeah, I'm your bishop, but I'm just your friend that loves you. And let's talk. And they'll tell you things, almost without shame, which is a beautiful thing because I'm not a big fan of shame. And they'll ask for help when they need it, and they'll talk to you. So we have about a dozen young men, about 8 of them attend regularly, and probably about the same young women. And they all come from different situations. Some of them come from typical families with mom and dad and kids. Some come from single parents. Some have really good home lives. Some have really bad home lives. You just have to love them. I keep saying this. It's like, why is this so hard? Even when they do things they shouldn't do. In fact, especially when they do things they shouldn't do. And there's a young woman in our ward who comes from a very difficult family situation. Her mother is delightful. Her dad, not so much. They're divorced. She doesn't have a good male role model in her life. She doesn't know what it's like to have an adult man just love her unconditionally. And every week she runs up and hugs me and says, hi, Bishop D, or, whatever she calls me. And I said, how are you this week? She's like, I'm doing okay. You need to talk? No, I'm good this week. And then sometimes it's, you need to talk? Yeah, can we go for a walk? So our church is it's on a corner, so it's got a long sidewalk. So a lot of the times when I'm interviewing kids, I'm not interviewing, I'm walking, side by side with them and just talking to them. So getting out of the office is a really important thing. Bishop's office are terrifying places. They shouldn't be, but it's a scary place, right? And if I get them out of the office and just walk around, the tension drops, and they'll just talk to me. So sometimes I got hot chocolate with them. I'll try and talk to them in places where it's not intimidating.
There's a couple of wonderful nuggets there. Anybody in this podcast has never talked about the physical layout of a bishop's office, and I'm having flashbacks because I tried to put my desk in the corner so I could never sit behind it, and I can't remember who told me I couldn't do that, if it was a church leader or a fellow counselor. But the only time I got behind it was ward council. Somebody told me I needed to be behind my desk for ward council, and before that, I'd even sat just in a circle with the whole ward council. I didn't want to be behind the desk. I wanted to be kind of equal footing with the other members of the ward council. So I would just take a regular chair and just sit randomly with the ward council. And I didn't do any of my bishop interviews across the desk. I didn't like that. And I love what you said, to actually give the young people the better chair. What kind of a message does that send, Bishop Bush? I'm just thinking of all the visual you're creating in that bishop's office to help somebody feel safe they can talk to you. And that comes natural for you. That's not in a handbook. I assume that's not in a training meeting. That's just something that comes natural for you. And the idea then of walking outside where it's still, you can still have some privacy, but they would maybe feel more comfortable opening up. That's cool.
Yeah, well, no one wants to walk out of the bishop's office crying, right? I mean, think about that, right? You walk out of the bishop's office and you're crying, and someone's standing there to come in, and it's like, oh, great, well, that went well. But if you're out walking around and they get emotional, you just keep walking for a few minutes, let them get it together, give them a tissue, and then, okay, you ready to go back in? Yep, okay. But yeah, I don't know whoever told you can't do that.
I can't remember either. I don't want to put somebody under the bus, but I can't.
Well, if I went on a podcast, I'd use a term to describe that I won't use. But no, that's nonsense. That's another word. I'll use nonsense instead. Because where is it? Where is it written? Nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. It might be tradition. What it really is a 1950s corporate artifact, right? Where the powerful person sits behind the desk and the not powerful person sits in front of the desk. Like being in the principal's office. So do you really want to be like the principal of the ward? Do you want to be the father of the ward?
Yeah, I was having a discussion maybe 8 or 10 years ago with my resident stake president about the executive secretary and my feelings about the naming of that calling, that I didn't want to be an executive, and rightly so. To your point, that's a relic from sort of a corporate infrastructure. I never renamed my executive secretary, but I wanted to call him my assistant or my coworker or something that just felt less corporate. Have you ever had any thoughts on that calling?
Do you have an administrative assistant at work?
Yeah, the woman who runs our office, I feel like I report to her. She just keeps everybody in line, but she technically is our administrative assistant. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you call her at work, though?
Allison.
Right. Perfect. And there you go.
Title.
Yeah. No, it's you call her the most important person in your business. I mean, and my business probably isn't quite as formal as yours. The outdoor industry is pretty laid back. In terms of dress code, I mean, if I'm wearing a shirt with buttons on it, that's a good day. And I really like not having to put on a uniform to go to work, because I have to put it on to go to church.
And I do love your social media in the summertime when you're out on the rivers and the lakes. It's great.
Yeah, well, I've had some really good interviews with youth in a canoe because, just paddling along. And I used to do this thing with the stake presidency before some schedules changed, but I called it Paddling with Mormons. And it's PWM, we're going to have Paddling with Mormons. And I would invite the stake presidency to come down to my shop, and we'd just throw a couple boats in the water and go for a paddle on the lake. And it was really fun because we just talk. And we didn't talk about anything specifically, but one of the times one of the counselors says, "Hey, we need a new bishop for the YSA ward. What do you think?" I said, "That's not my job." He said, "Well, what about this person?" I said, "That doesn't feel right to me." He said, "What about this person?" I said, "That sounds perfect." And they said, "That's what we thought too." And so, it was just out talking. And they really taught me a lot. The first 6 months I was in bishopric, I was really struggling because we had a lot of welfare issues with people who had severe mental illness. And we're trying to keep them housed, right? Not just healthy, but just not on the street. And it's not like the church is broke, right? I mean, they can afford to pay fast offerings. But there was one member who was just very, very consumptive, serious mental problems. And I was out paddling with Steve, one of the big presidency, and he said, I can tell you're troubled about something. And I said, yeah, I'm just, the welfare stuff is just really hard. And he said, well, I was a bishop. I wrote the mission. President said, I want some welfare missionaries to come into the ward. I want to get a set of those so they can help the people that are always, struggling to kind of get their get their life together and learn how to budget and all that stuff. And he said, and the mission president said, no, sorry, not a good use of resources. So he was young and stupid, so he wrote a letter to Bishop Cossé, or was it Bishop Cossé? It was before the presiding bishop, anyway, and said, I need some welfare missionaries for my ward. And they wrote back and said no. And then somebody from the bishop or the presiding bishop's office called him and said, look, here's the deal. There's going to be people you deal with who are going to be on church welfare the rest of their lives. That is a fact. You just have to get used to it, okay? You're not going to teach a person who has borderline personality disorder and schizophrenia how to budget, right? So don't. Just, work with the system, work with, the community resources, and bring all those to bear and help your member. And I had this huge sigh of relief. It's like, so I don't have to fix everybody's stuff. He's like, Darren, you can't. You just can't. So those kinds of things happen when you're just in informal settings is where I learn everything. And so that's one reason I like being on the water. But yeah.
Do you feel like you don't quite fit a typical bishop, or do you feel like how do you feel about that? Because you're different than a typical bishop, and do sometimes you wonder if it's okay to be you, or you just know that being you is who you are and what the Lord needs you to be to meet the needs of the people in your ward?
I'm very comfortable being exactly who I am. And if that's, I would be an ineffective bishop if I tried to put on some sort of airs and act like a bishop is supposed to act. And I think people do that sometimes, and I think it actually hurts them because it makes them unapproachable. And if someone radically changes their personality when they get called to be a bishop, I would wonder what's going on with that person. And I actually struggle with this, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is holiness versus piety. And I strive very hard to be holy, but I couldn't give a fig for piety. There's no reason to pretend like you're anything different than you are. And I don't know how to say this. I'm working very hard every day to try and be a better person. I really want to be more like Christ. I don't like some of the rough edges I have. I'd like to knock them out a little bit. And I am. I'm getting much better. My quota of swear words is dropping. So I have my own little swear jar. And it goes to the humanitarian aid fund. So, yeah, I'm not, awesome. I'm not trying to be flippant. I'm not a pious person. It doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I mean, I would just think that your ward loves you for who you are and recognizes you're pretty authentic. And I would guess if I'm sitting in your ward, I just know I can talk to you about stuff in my life. And you've just communicated, or signaling is what some people call it, just that you're safe to talk to. And I've always felt that's one of the greatest things a local leader can do, is to create a feeling about him. Our own bishop got vulnerable in his testimony meeting where he just talked about his own weight. It was really unique because I'm a little overweight, and he just said, I've been overweight, and I keep going to these physicals, and they keep telling me I need to lose weight, and it's been really hard for me. And there wasn't really a resolution. He didn't announce to the ward he's going to lose X number, but he was just kind of real as part of his testimony. And I saw a human side of him and a vulnerable side of him, and it was signaling to me that, I could just talk to this guy because he's pretty real, and he doesn't need to be the perfect person to preside over a ward. It was just, I think, so I like that. And I would guess if we had your ward members on, they would say the same things about you, that you're committed to the church, you're doing your best to live the gospel, but you're also just who you are. and that you're pretty approachable because you're pretty real who you are.
Oh, that's Lucy. Yeah. I have a very large dog.
We had a dog named Lucy once. We've got about...
Yeah, come on, Lucy, let's go outside. Yeah, Lucy's a 10-month-old Newfoundland Pyrenees puppy who weighs 90 pounds. And I'm kind of terrified she's going to keep growing, but she's a sweetheart.
Talk about LGBTQ. We're about 50 minutes, and I'd love to keep these about an hour. Talk about, how did you connect with this space? I think that's the first way we crossed paths, was just our joint interest in trying to help our LGBTQ friends. How did you connect to this space? And what are your thoughts on this topic?
This is a cool story, and it's about me being educated. So I grew up in a fairly conservative Mormon family in Southern California, and we didn't really know any gay people. Well, no, that's not true. We didn't know any out gay people. I mean, there's plenty of gay people around. The only gay people that we knew that were out were usually, people in my school who were in drama and very much out and very out about it. And I didn't dislike them. I was in music and it was just, they weren't part of my world, right? They weren't, I wasn't friends with them, wasn't enemies. They just weren't part of my life, right? And a beautiful thing happened. In 1994, we bought a little house, a little 2-bedroom house in this little neighborhood in Madison. It was our first house. And we had, Whitney was about 4, and or 4 or 5, and Ian was a newborn, next to this wonderful gay couple that had been together longer than we had been married. And the Dons, Don and Don. And they were just, from the time we moved in, the kindest, most wonderful people. To the extent where my daughter, I was trying to teach her how to ride a bike and rapidly losing patience. And Don came out and put his arm around me and said, "I got this. Go in the house." So my gay next door neighbor taught my daughter how to ride a bike. When my daughter's appendix ruptured, they were the first ones at the hospital. I mean, these are Christian people. These are truly Christ-like people. And we had this great conversation once. We had this fence between us. It was kind of like the guy in Home Improvement, right? I could just barely see over it. And they were sitting in their patio, just kind of hanging out and, reading the newspaper and listening to the radio, and their laundry was drying. And I said, "Oh, it's the Dons living that disgusting homosexual lifestyle, reading the paper in front of everybody and drinking Diet Coke." He's like, "Yes, and laundry. Our laundry is right here where everybody can see it." And we're just cracking up, right? It was hilarious. But it led to an interesting conversation. Because I says, "Yeah, there really isn't a homosexual lifestyle, is there?" He's like, "Yeah, you're looking at it." He said, "There's no heterosexual lifestyle, is there?" I'm like, "No, of course not." He said, "Right." He said, "Darren, Castro Street is just as foreign to me as Girls Gone Wild is to you and Mardi Gras." Right? So when your only example of what homosexuality looks like is a gay pride parade from Castro Street shown on the news, it's like, yeah, okay, that's part of the LGBTQ experience. But it's a very small part of it. Just like Mardi Gras, girls flashing people to get beads, that's not part of what the heterosexual experience is, and except in a very small way. So it isn't about sexuality. That was one of these, oh yeah, of course. And we stayed friends for years until they moved away. We're still friends on Facebook. I still love them dearly. But they came to my defense a couple times during Prop 8, because people were just, trashing the LDS church and trashing Mormons. And he was on a message board, and he spoke and said, "Look, you're painting everybody with a broad brush, just like you accuse them of doing." My next door neighbor is Mormon, and his family's Mormon, and we've never met anybody that loved us more. So stop it. That was kind of the start of my involvement with the LGBTQ community. And then I joined, my business joined the Madison Queer Chamber of Commerce. Even though I'm not gay, it doesn't matter. It just means we're supportive of the community. And then I started advertising with my business in Our Lives magazine. Now, Our Lives magazine is a Madison LGBTQ publication that's actually spreading out to southern Wisconsin. It doesn't take alcohol or tobacco ads, which is a mainstay in a lot of LGBTQ magazines, because they're money, right? And they're trying to run on a shoestring. And it's hard to run a magazine without taking alcohol or tobacco ads. So because they don't have alcohol or tobacco ads, they are in the high school libraries. So queer kids in the high school can read this about people that are like normal people. So Madison's a little different, obviously, but like the president of one of the HMOs here is a gay man who's competent, wonderful, and amazing. And I mean, we all know that the talent in the LGBTQ community is I mean, the artistry and the music and the competence. And our financial planner is a married lesbian who lives around the corner from the church, who is one of my favorite people in the world. And so my life is very rich and very full because of that. And I'm the only Mormon bishop that ever wrote an article for their newspaper, for their magazine.
Wow.
And the title was called "An Unlikely Ally," which cracked me up. But so the LGBTQ community knows who I am. Some of them are a little bit nervous because I'm affiliated with the church they think hates them. And I can't change that. What I can change is how they feel about me. So I go to the open dinners, which is it's the business group in Madison. So it's like a chamber of commerce, basically, and we have speakers and we sponsor it. And whenever they say, sponsored by Rudiviga Paddle Sports, it's like, woo! So it's not like I'm doing anything different than most people would do if they understand the community. And I had a really good mentor. The publisher of the magazine told me, here's how you work with the gay community. And I said, oh, wait, invite them to your store and treat them like humans when they get there? And he looked at me and says, yeah, it's kind of that simple. And I had a colleague from another state call me one time. He said, seems like you're really good at marketing to those gays. How do you do that? And I said, well, first of all, I don't call them those gays. You idiot. And second of all, I invite them to my store. When they get there, I love them. Like, yeah, but like, how do you market to them? I said, how do you invite people to your store? He's like, well, I advertise. And I said, yeah, you do that. I mean, there's no difference. They are just people. And when we start segmenting them into the other, we kind of lose the idea of, they're not a demographic to be marketed to. They're a group to be loved. And that's true of everybody.
Do you ever
Do
you ever doubt yourself in saying you're doing something inconsistent with what Christ would do or our teachings of our church? And if you do, what sort of doctrinal foundation or Christ foundation keeps you being able to do this?
Well, I'll ask you the question back. What have I just said that would lead you to believe that would be the case? And
nothing. And so that's
right.
Yeah. I mean, my answer to my question to you would be you're just doing what Christ did, and you didn't sell out our doctrine. You didn't compromise anything that we stand for and we believe as Latter-day Saints to do what you're doing. And in fact, you are doing what Christ did, was just see everybody as the same human family and invite people to your table, so to speak, that society said didn't belong there. And
yep.
And so and you just humanized a group of people by getting to know them. That sometimes we do humanize people until we get to know them. So I love what you're doing. And if you've got a closeted LGBTQ youth or ward member that becomes aware of what you're doing, I'm thinking if I'm that person and I do need to come out to somebody, I know I can talk to Bishop Bush. Or even if you're not LGBTQ and you're kind of aware of what you're doing and you just need to talk to Bishop Bush about complicated stuff, I'm thinking to myself, this guy can probably handle it. He may not know all the answers to everything, but he's safe for me to talk to about what's going on in life because I just seen how he loves everybody. So I call that signaling and creating an environment where people talk.
Well, I have a little lapel pin that I wear at church. That's you've probably seen them. They're little CTR shields with a rainbow on them that says "I'll walk with you," which is my favorite primary song. And it's no big deal. It's this little tiny pin. And pretty soon all my counselors and really excited presidents like, oh, I want one of those too. So I bought a big bag of them. So the leadership in our ward, a lot of them wear these on their lapels. And again, signaling, it's just saying, if you're worried, you can talk to me. And there's people in our ward that are queer, that participate. When I talk to people outside the church, it's like, what do you think about the church's stance against gay marriage? I'm like, that's their stance against gay marriage, and I think gay marriage would be wonderful. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah. How can you say that? I said, because civil marriage is civil marriage. I didn't say that temple marriages are, those should happen because that's out of my pay grade. But I have to think at some point that civil marriage will be accepted, because that's going to open up the church to a whole lot of people that currently can't participate, who have lots and lots to add, including several friends of mine. And they love the church. They have testimonies of the gospel. They're just currently not participating because they're in a same-sex marriage. And again, I can't predict this. I'm not advocating for it. I don't get up on the pulpit and say, hey, everybody, I think you should do this. That's not my place. But if someone asks my opinion, I'll tell them. And, the brethren have made it clear that if you support same-sex marriage on social media or whatever, that's fine. I mean, they said that. And Joseph Smith was very clear about those sorts of things in terms of being, you can think what you want to think, and you only have to believe something if it's true. And if for some reason, you cross the line when you get up and say, yeah, you know what, and the brethren are wrong about this. And, everybody's wrong about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean you need to be the person that fixes it, right? So I don't agree with the general authorities on everything, but that's okay. I support them and sustain them, just like my staff support and sustain me when they say, I don't think this is a good idea. I think you should do this instead. That's sustaining me. That's giving me information that I didn't have. And again, that's different than, because of the nature of the church. General authorities are called and inspired by God to do what they're supposed to do. So I'm just calling it like I see it, I guess.
And I love your honesty, and I think it helps us all just be honest as we're doing our best going forward. I have one more question that comes to my mind, Darren. Talk to a listener who's barely hanging on to the church and just wondering, and I realize you may not know the backstory, just talk to somebody who's saying, I just don't know if I can stay. What would you say?
We need you. We need you. Philip Barlow. Have you had him on your podcast?
No, I haven't.
Philip Barlow is one of my unintentional mentors. And you may not even remember this conversation, but when I was in grad school, I was 28. That's when I was told that the three enemies of the church are feminist intellectuals and homosexuals. And I was in graduate school, and I'm thinking, well, I'm two of those three. What does that leave me? You know, and that's something that is not doctrinal. That's somebody's opinion. And Philip Barlow was a visiting professor at the University of Rochester, and we were sitting outside the bishop's office and waiting for ward council or PEC, waiting for PEC to start. And he said, "So Darren, what do you think about, homosexuality?" And I gave him some mealy mouth answer. Well, it's no one really knows. There's a lot of stuff people don't know yet. And he said, "What do you think about abortion?" I said, it's a complex subject, and some people say it's murder, some people don't. And he's like, "What do you think?" I said, "I don't really know." And he said, "That's not acceptable." He says, "You need to dig into this stuff hard and look at it critically, because someday you'll be a leader in the church, and the church needs you to stay." And at this point, he had not known that I was, had doubts and was struggling. And I think a lot of people think that if you have doubts and are struggling, you don't belong. And I was elders quorum president, for heaven's sakes. And he said, "Well, you need to think about these things. You need to spend time investigating, praying about, so you have answers and you can give them." And it was just one of those things where it was the first time he said, "You need to be intellectually honest if you're going to be a member of the church. Just like you can't survive on borrowed light, you can't survive on an unexamined life. You can't just say in Sunday school, well, the brethren say this, so the thinking is done." And that's another dogmatic thing that I don't like as well. When the brethren speak, the thinking is done. Joseph Smith would roll over in his grave if he heard that. It's not true, right? That's when the thinking starts. It's like, okay, where are they coming from? Why do they say that? What are they thinking? And I've never had a church authority say, "You just need to shut up and not think about it anymore." And Hugh B. Brown said, "We're not so concerned that your thoughts are orthodox or heterodox, but that you have thoughts." And that to me is that kind of wraps it up in a nutshell. You need to think about the gospel and ponder it and exercise it and get and poke at it a little bit and say, how does it fit into my life really? Can I have spiritual conversations with people in a way that is real and authentic? And I'll tell one little more story, then I'll shut up. I was on the phone with someone at work one time. It was one of my vendors, I think, someone who was at one of the factories, and they had an Italian last name. I said, "Your last name?" And it was Colicchio. I said, "That's a good Sicilian name." And he kind of stopped and said, "How do you know I'm Sicilian?" I said, "Well, I was a missionary there." He said, "No kidding." We started talking. I said, "Hey, what's your dad's?" My grandpa was born in Palermo. I said, "Cool. What's your grandpa's name?" And he told me. I said, "About when he was born?" He said, "Yeah, I think it was like 1915 or something." And I'm tappity, right, in Family Search. And it comes out, I'm like, "Oh, your grandpa was born just outside of Palermo in this place called Aceriale." He's like, "What? How do you know that?" I said, "I'm looking it up online right now." I said, "Give me your email. I'll send you a link." So we had a 5-minute conversation after we had done business about, I was a missionary and here's your ancestor on Family Search. And who knows what's going to come of that.
Wow.
And I didn't do that as a missionary thing. I did that as a Darren thing. But guess what? It happened to be a missionary thing, right? So just live the gospel out loud. You be you. And if you do that, cool things happen,
Why, when you, I don't think, you inferred you went through a faith crisis. Just, why did you, if you ever felt you were going to leave the church, why did you stay? Why do you stay a committed member of the church?
My wife would say, because if we leave, they win. It's just as simple as that. If everybody who has a faith transition leaves the church, what's left behind is something that is far less rich than it should be. The church doesn't want a bunch of people that are compliant and non-thinkers. The most important thing an organization has is a dedicated, loving critic. Someone whose testimony and dedication and loyalty to the organization is without question. Because if you're going to throw rocks and you're on the fringes, they'll just think, well, that person just doesn't care about the church and they're just being critical. But when a person who has the testimony and loves the Savior and believes that the church is the mechanism for the Savior to implement his work on the earth, then you can say, you know what, I don't like how this works. And I'll give you a quick example. So I was in a bishopric training with the whole stake, and we were talking about, about a year ago, talking about, safety and, the whole thing about, they were worried about sexual abuse, which they should be worried about. But they're talking about, all the windows and two up and two deep and all that. And I'm like, that's great. I said, and then here's the bishop hotline. You can call if there's abuse. And I said, so what if one of my members calls the bishop hotline and says I'm being abused? What would they tell her? They would tell her to go to the bishop. I said, what if I'm the one abusing her? And they got quiet. I said, look, I'm not here to protect the church. I'm here to protect the individual. There should be a hotline for people to call. Not the bishop, but people. That is my feeling. So I want the individual to be safe. So if I were in charge, which I'm not, I would have a hotline for people to call. It isn't through their bishop. And it's really quiet. And then the stake president said, well, that's why you're the bishop of the Madison First Ward. So thank you. And then afterwards, 4 or 5 bishops came up in the hallway and said, thank you for saying that. And I said, how come you never say that in the meeting, right? It's like the board meeting after the board meeting, right? Everybody goes out in the hallway and says, yeah, you were right. I'm like, say it in there, okay? So those are kind of questions you have to ask out loud. It's uncomfortable, right? I mean, I put myself in a position that was kind of weird, right? What if I'm the one that's abusing her? There's no place for her to go, right? And I have several friends who had very bad reactions to, had bad experiences with their bishops and have left the church as a result. One was being abused by her husband and was told, you're making this up. And look, they call it the bishop lottery, right? There's 30,000 of us. Not all of us are going to be effective. And we're all highly imperfect. That's kind of the nature of being human. But I hear things like that, and I just cringe. And when my cousin says, I'd still be in the church if you were my bishop, I just weep. And this is really hard for me to even talk about. We need to do better at listening. We need to do better at loving. And we need to do better at learning. So thank you for having a podcast that does all those things.
Well, thank you, Bishop Darren Bush, our friend. And there's been some wonderful insights and nuggets. And I think a lot of our listeners just feel like they could talk to you about anything and feel your love and your good heart, your understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and just recognizing we need to do better. I think you can be faithful LDS and recognize we need to do better and just support our leaders and sustain and support them as they help us continue to do better. We've had a lot of adjustments in 2019. I certainly think that creates a feeling that we can continue to have adjustments as we continue to fully restore the church. So
right.
Godspeed.
It's still being restored, Richard.
It is.
And we get to participate in it. Isn't that cool?
And Godspeed with you, Darren, and for what you're doing in your ward and your family and your career and just helping everybody feel welcome. And thanks our listeners for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Ostler.